good evening and welcome to the Breaking Conservative. This is Conservatism on Tap. I'm your host, Wes. Happy to be with you as well as John. How you doing, John? How has your week been?
Pretty hectic. We are in the new space. I'm surrounded by boxes right now, although you may not be able to tell. But we're going to get this place all nice and souped up. The garage will be my space.
Nice. Very nice. What you got to drink tonight?
So I am drinking. So now that I have returned home,
Yeah.
I'm drinking the Great Return. That is made by Hardywood Brewery. So that brewery is something special to me. Before I encountered Hardywood Brewery in Virginia, I thought that every beer was 6%, 7% at the most. Hardywood showed me that you can have as high as 16% beers,
Uh-huh.
and it's still beer. So they make all kinds of things, gingerbread stouts. They make coffee stouts and things like that I definitely love the most. But Hardywood is a special place in my heart. That's something I've always wanted to show you too when you come up to Virginia. But the Great Return IPA
That's
is for
awesome.
me today.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been enjoying some whiskey. Got some caramel turtle, which I've been finishing off. That's what I've had the past few weeks. So, no, I've been excited about this. It's been a really busy week for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of adjusting to all the COVID-19 restrictions and like going back to work and having to wear a mask and doing the 6 feet thing and trying to make that through, taking our temperatures and all that. So it's been wild trying to adjust to kind of the new normal. One of the things that I want to talk about tonight, though, is I put it on the agenda. I know we had there's so many things to talk about, but really this one stuck out to me the most is John Lewis passing away and what that meant. So I did probably a couple dozen posts this week on our page, but this one really stuck out the most is we had about 100 people either like or dislike or react to the post, and then we had a couple dozen comments as well going through this and what it meant. So I think, we're going to talk about COVID. We're going to talk about all those things that are going on. But for tonight, I really want to focus on this because it really brought out a lot of like what's going on in politics tonight. So who was this guy? What did he
Yep.
mean to the country? What did he mean to the left? What does he mean to the right? And how do we handle that? I think was a huge point of discussion. So, for tonight, that's really what I want to do, John. So, any thoughts on that of what you know about him or what you'd like to know?
I'd love to know more about what's very controversial with him. There's so many articles that are honoring his history. He's written, some memoirs about his time in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And so many of the clips that I've seen of him strike me as just being someone who's very genuine.
Mm.
But I think a lot when we made that post, we certainly got so many people on the right and the left, people wanting to honor him and people just wanting to say, let him rot, basically, which is pretty harsh,
Mm.
especially for a man that has done so much to influence our policies today.
Yeah.
So I'm eager to get into this show, Wes. I'm eager to
Yeah,
see it.
yeah. There's so much tension right now, because we've been going through the COVID restrictions now for months. I know people are sick of that. They're ready to get past that. We've had so many racial debates going on in the country for now. It feels like months for that as well. And then we've got this election coming up, right? We're starting to see
Yeah.
primaries. We've got one. I live in Florida. We've got one here next month. And then you've got the big elections coming in November. So with all of that tension going on, I think a lot of people can take that out on someone like John Lewis. So I think it's important to go through this and see where we meet, in terms of what should conservatives think about it and give some advice. But yeah, a lot of folks don't know much about him, and I took some time and I went through kind of his history. So let's start
Yep.
with who this guy was. So I'm bringing up a couple pictures now of who John Lewis was. So he was born in 1940 and just died this month. He lived in Alabama. He was born in Troy to sharecroppers, and essentially these were people who worked on land that they didn't own, and they got a small piece of the pie for it. So you think, once slavery ended, what did they do with all the former slaves? Well, in many cases, they went back to the plantations that they were from and had to earn wages somehow, and that's how they did it. So he was descended from folks in that situation, and then he got his degrees. He studied in Nashville, actually, which I think you spent some time up there, right? You studied pretty close to Nashville Murfreesboro. I know I've been there a bunch of times.
Right.
He organized sit-ins during that time, so I put that on there. Is that while he was in Nashville, he got involved with the civil rights movement. He met
Yeah.
Rosa Parks when he was 17. He met MLK when he was 18, and he really got interested in their nonviolent protest movement. And that's really what captivated him. And he kept that belief his entire life of believing that nonviolence was the way to go. So he was arrested and jailed multiple times when he was in Nashville because he would sit at segregated lunch counters. He would say whites only, and he would just go and sit there. And then, of course, people would get angry about it. They would report him, and then he would get arrested and jailed as he protested. Very much like Rosa Parks getting on the bus, that type of thing.
Yeah, well, what they would even do, I was reading on this, is that they would sit in on the white sections of the bus, and the bus driver would empty out the entire bus, and of course, they wouldn't go. And then the bus would just drive over to the police station and say, all right, they're not leaving, so take them. And it got to a point where eventually, though, legislation passed where the bus driver would keep doing that. They would keep doing the sit-ins, and the police officers were like, we can't arrest them. That's in the past.
Yeah.
So the sit-ins became more and more popular.
Yeah, and he was a big part of that. So then you get into his role as a freedom rider. So there was 13 folks. There was both white and black folks who called themselves the freedom riders. And I thought this was fascinating. This was in 1961. And essentially what they were doing is they were trying to fulfill a law that the Supreme Court had already adjudicated. So the Supreme Court came down in 1960 and said that integrated buses and public transportation has to be in effect. That whether you're white or black, you can get on public transportation and you can ride it. So the Supreme Court says this, but then many southern states refused to actually enforce this rule. They refused to change their practice. And so a group of guys got together and they said, we're going to call ourselves the Freedom Riders, and what we're going to do is we're going to get on these buses, both black and white, and we're going to see what happens. We're going to call these southern states on their lack of enforcement of what the Supreme Court had already adjudicated. And so he did that in 1961 when he was 21 years old, and he was assaulted. And you can see a picture there, and that is a group of folks who have come out and they heard about the Freedom Riders, and they're assaulting them and beating them up. And you can see that quote there. He said, "It was very violent. I thought I was going to die. I was left lying at the Greyhound bus station in Montgomery, unconscious." And I thought this was wild to me because I used to live in Montgomery. I lived there for 3 years, and I know exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah.
The old Greyhound bus station that's up there, and exactly where he was when this happened. And so really, this is when he started to rise up in the civil rights movement, because he took on this bold agenda of calling these different states and cities on not enforcing the law and kind of proving that they were going against what the Supreme Court had already said. So that catapulted him really to the top of the civil rights movement. And then he became one of what they call the Big Six in terms of the leaders who organized the March on Washington in 1963. Yep. So he's 23 years old at this point, and he finds himself right there next to MLK and the other top leaders of the civil rights movement. And he speaks at the same rally where MLK gave his I Have a Dream speech. So everybody knows the speech. MLK has a holiday. We all honor him. Well, John Lewis was one of the guys who was up there with him with the exact same crowd talking about the exact same thing. And I want to show you a clip from his speech. So about 2 minutes of him talking when he was a young guy at 23 talking about civil rights. So let's take a look at that.
We are tired. We are tired of being beaten by policemen. We're tired of seeing our people locked up in jail over and over again. And then you holler, be patient. How long can we be patient? We want our freedom, and we want it now. We do not want to go to jail, but we will go to jail if this is the price we must pay for love, brotherhood, and true peace. I appeal to all of you to get in this great revolution that is sweeping this nation. Get in and stay in the streets of every city, every village and hamlet of this nation until true freedom comes, until the revolution of 1776 is complete. We must get in this revolution and complete the revolution. For in the Delta of Mississippi, in Southwest Georgia, in the Black Belt of Alabama, in Harlem, in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and all over this nation, the black masses are on the march for jobs and freedom. They're talking about slow down and stop. We will not stop. All of the forces of Eastland, Barnett, Wallace, and Thurman will not stop this revolution. If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, the time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. But we will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today. By the forces of our demand, our determination, and our numbers, we shall splinter the segregated South into 1,000 pieces and put them together in the image of God and democracy. We must say, wake up, America, wake up, for we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient.
So there you go. That's that's his speech. What do you make of that?
Well, first, it's pretty clear that like he has spent time like on both sides of the pulpit. In my readings about his life, he was raised in Alabama, and he wanted to be a preacher. Like he wanted to be someone who would be in front of people and speaking for causes that he believed in. And actually, with this speech, Wes, like this speech this is his toned down speech, because you had key representatives in the White House that actually weren't going to support what was going on with all the speeches. They actually had police that were ready to pull the plug if they heard something they didn't like.
Yeah.
So you had the members of the civil rights movement only like hours before and almost up to the point where he was going to give his speech. Then they had gotten copies of it, and they said, like, you need to edit this language because some of what you're saying, like this revolution stuff, needs to be coupled with nonviolence. Don't say scorched earth here, replace it with something more general there. And he was very, very like reluctant to do any sort of editing, I think, because he was just very, very gritty and real. He had been beaten. He had seen so many things that had happened to his people. So I think it's very, very interesting that what you hear is like he's using so many locales and places that are real to people. He's not saying promised land language, for like Martin Luther King would do. He's actually saying we're going to march here and here and here. And I think it's just it grounds him, in the here and now. He even says that like preaching inside the church was pretty tiring if you don't see it acted out in the streets. And I think that's what he was trying to do, is take his preaching out here to everyone and be real with it. So that's what I get from his speech. It was actually it was the most ferocious speech, I think, out of any of those. He even said that Martin Luther King's speech wasn't his best, but in the moment it was the most immortal. So that's kind of funny, I thought.
I mean, there are a couple things that stand out to me is, he talks about he links his revolution to 1776, right? As he talks about the founding fathers and their promises of equality and how it's time to complete that revolution. It's time to fulfill that. It's time to continue fighting until that happens. So I thought that was pretty impressive. And then he talks about brotherhood and love, and that's the spirit of what he's doing because, I agree with you that there was this more extreme part of who he was, and yet he kind of learned to temper that, right? Because he's saying there with MLK, and there's a lot of this anger and how do we approach this? But then there's also a much more radical version in terms of Malcolm X and that part, the Black Panthers and all that. And he's not a part of that. He's making a distinction, and he's saying, I'm on the side of fulfilling the revolution of 1776, and I am on the side of brotherhood and love and nonviolence, as opposed to many leaders of the civil rights era who were not. And so, I think that's worth noting, and that's clear in his speech. And then you see just the power of his voice even as a young guy. So he's kind of like channeling the same type of rhetoric as MLK when he talks about Jacksonville and Cambridge, and he's like naming off these different places and kind of riling everybody up. It's very similar. You can see that he's being mentored by Martin Luther King, the same kind of talk. But after that, he goes on to participate in the Selma marches. So bringing that slide up, that was in 1964. So a year later, if you've seen the movie Selma, that's a big part of it.
Yep.
And he helped lead over 600 marchers during what's known as Bloody Sunday. And essentially what happened is he was in the mix of all of these people that were on this march. And while they were marching, Alabama state troopers charged them with horses. They threw tear gas at them. And then all of the marchers got on their knees to pray under John Lewis's leadership. And the troopers charged them with horses and started, hurting, killing many people, and ended up fracturing John Lewis's skull. And so he was damaged or hurt permanently for that. Had scars even after he recovered from it and had surgery and everything else. But so he was very much involved in that as well. So you've got a guy who was there, during the sit-ins. He was there for the Freedom Riders. He was there, active in the same speeches that MLK gave on that march to Washington, and then he's here in Selma as well. And then you move on to what has he done since then? Well, he started getting into politics after the Civil Rights Act passed, and he got in the Carter administration. He worked in their retired senior volunteer program. This is 1977. And then he started getting involved in politics in Atlanta. He was elected to the city council a few years later, and then he ran for Congress and got in 1986. And then after that time, he was reelected up until the current year. He was reelected 16 different times, and then his record was one of the most liberal members of Congress. And I think that's where a lot of people on the right start to distance themselves and have a problem with his voting record, because it was certainly pretty far left. I was looking at things that he had voted on and against, and I mean, this was a guy who was against Desert Storm, in the first Gulf War. He was so against any type of intervention, things like that. He was very far to the left on. But you look at his overall legacy, and I mean, it's there. I'm listing here all the different awards: Four Freedoms Award, Profile and Courage, NAACP, of course, gave him a huge award, Golden Plate Award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Obama gave it to him. The Navy is named a ship after him. He's got honorary degrees from almost every school you can think of. And when he was on the stage when Barack Obama was inaugurated, and what happened there was Obama had him standing up as one of the only people left alive who had actually participated in that march in 1963 and been on stage with MLK. And Obama left him a note after the inauguration saying, "John, this is because of you, the fact that I can get elected as a black man to the White House." And so it just goes to show how important this guy was to black Americans, to liberals, to Democrats, and to everybody who had participated in these marches back in the day and through the civil rights movement. And so that's really what is being honored here. Is you see this man and his legacy, definitely a Democrat, definitely left-leaning, but then you also see all the things that he did for the civil rights movement. And you see, for example, Mike Pence coming out and saying, Congressman John Lewis was a great man whose courage and decades of public service changed America forever, and he will be deeply missed. And you even see Donald Trump saying that he's saddened to hear of the news of civil rights hero John Lewis passing, and that Melania and Donald Trump both send their prayers to he and his family. So that's really where most of America sits, and I post this on our page, and I get all kinds of comments. And I'm pulling these now, and I can read through some of them, but it's pretty nasty in terms of what people see in terms of his legacy versus what we've shown here. I've got Charles here who says he was great for civil rights, but he was a baby-killing communist in Congress who committed treason with the frivolous coup attempt in the impeachment. BS. You've got Kevin who's saying he's probably riding with the old devil right now, along with the rest of the corrupt people that's in hell. And it goes on to say, he supported abortion. He's a divider. John says, great my foot. He was a power-hungry fool, lover of power and money. And then Ziggy's saying that much like Elijah Cummings, I will never understand why people honor such horrible, corrupt, vile human beings, and on and on. So help me understand, Jonathan. What do you, when I kind of lay out what he's done in his history, how do you see him? Do you see him as great, as one person said, great for civil rights, but then also a vile liberal, or somewhere in between? What do you make of it?
Wes, that's obviously a hard question. So first off, I want to clarify that like one of my favorite books ever that I've ever read is it's a sci-fi book, but I promise it relates. It's by Orson Scott Card. It's called Speaker for the Dead. And what you have is a character who comes into a particular household, and his job is to honor the dead in the way that is new, that what we might not see as honoring. And that means that you get up in front of everybody during their funeral, and you basically say, I'm just laying out all the facts and all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we need to take it all in as that person's life and still do that person honor for all the good that you can see, because there obviously is good that overlaps. And that's kind of what I take to this as well. It's interesting, Wes, because we're still in a national conversation, whether we like it or not, about people that we have established this country on, and have said that these are great people and yet flawed individuals. And we defend them as complicated people, but yet there needs to come a point where we say, based upon all that they have done in their life and what they have represented, we stand on their shoulders and we honor that. And I think that from what you told me, like there is so much to honor in John Lewis. There absolutely is. I mean, Trump was bashing him just a couple of years ago, right? For the crime in his district. John Lewis didn't attend Trump's inauguration and called him a racist. And yet you still have Trump honoring him. So, and you have John Lewis writing in his memoirs that you have to have brotherly affection and compassion for the other side. What got me in the comments today was that you had people saying that, if they're not on your side, they're your enemies politically. Right. And you need to fight that with aggression and strength. And what's amazing in John Lewis's life is all that had been accomplished was done with nonviolence. He was always a proponent. I mean, he might have been ferocious with his speeches, right? Because he just wanted to see change, but he didn't want to see it with violence. I mean, the fact that they accomplished all this without violence, Wes, is absolutely tremendous. I mean, they were beaten, like you said, and they were still nonviolent throughout this process, which I think speaks volumes to today when you've got loads of violence that are going around on the nation during these they might be outliers in the protests, but it's still going on.
Yeah.
And I know that he was very much wanting, a new generation to be politicized, to get involved. I mean, it's the photos of him getting beaten at that point that really helped Lyndon B. Johnson to write in 1965 the Voting Rights Act and pass that right through. And the thing is that John Lewis actually saw that gutted.
Yeah.
Like in 2006, that was basically gutted. And then he spent the rest of his term wanting to advocate for the Voting Rights Advancement Act. And so I think that what I get from it is that you have someone who believes strongly in certain values and principles, and he was willing that even though he saw people that were against him, he wasn't going to advocate violence. He wasn't going to advocate strength and this aggression to just kind of pinhole you into a decision. It was about using the public sphere to actually get out there and advocate, speak your mind and speak it boldly and speak it proudly and get everyone in on it with you to create a new movement. And I think what he probably lamented is that the generation that came after him didn't get politicized in the same way that they did. Right, which I think probably made the Civil Rights Act lose some of its steam. But even, every side sees themselves as losing at some point. I know that people on the left, when Trump was elected, they thought the world was ending politically, right, and economically. And then you've got people on the right where they see that their Confederate monuments are being taken down or the Founding Fathers are being questioned, and all of a sudden we're like, oh man, we're losing our ground. And you see John Lewis who saw his this work of the Voting Rights Act being gutted, and yet he still saw the eternal aspect of freedom, through it all. So you don't see him being discouraged where he just kind of whisked away in obscurity. He always stayed a strong voice for for what he believed in. And I think that we can get lessons from that about working with the other side and working through our political structures to make a difference, rather than say it's only brute strength that really makes this work.
Yeah. That's very well put. A couple things here. The first one I would say is when Mike Pence is talking about him being great, and when Trump is calling him a hero, they're not talking about his voting record on abortion, right? They're not
Right.
talking about him being the most liberal in Congress. They're talking about his incredible record and what he went through on civil rights. They're focusing on that, which was the passion of his heart, right? I'm sure he had opinions on everything. I watched a video of him talking about the arts and how important music was to his life. And that's great, like he was a big proponent of the arts. But what was near and dear to his heart from the time that he was a young guy was the nonviolent civil rights movement, which turned out to be an amazing and great thing. I mean, you see him standing up for the law, what the Supreme Court has said, and challenging states to abide by the Constitution and the Supreme Court that it empowered. And eventually they got to a point where they recognized that. He did so many good things, right? And yet we're going to focus on the bad, That's the challenge for me. Is we have, this man who did so many good things, and we're going to wash it all away because of an issue that we disagree on. I disagree with him completely on abortion. I disagree with him completely on many of the liberal stances. But I can still say, you know what? I disagree on those things. But, now as he's passed and really over the course of his life, I'm going to focus on those good things, because how am I going to be judged? If you look at my worst moments in life, then it's not going to be pretty. Right? If you look at my best moments in life, then it's going to be great. And so we are more complicated than just any one particular issue. And so how are we going to choose to judge someone? How are we going to choose to look at them? Is it going to be through the best, through the worst, or is it going to be some nuance in between? And when I see people writing someone off, as just awful because of, something that they did that wasn't even the passion of their heart or their life's focus, then I think that standard's, a little too high for any of us to measure. That's one. Two is I don't understand how people differ from Trump on this and Mike Pence, right? If the Republican Party is very much sold on Donald Trump and his leadership and supporting him and following him when he says, hey, go right, we go right. When he says go left, we go left. And he's saying, let's honor this man as a hero. And yet we have all these people who are refusing to do that, including people that follow our page. And like in this case, I stand with the president. Like I stand with Mike Pence. I stand with, what they're saying in terms of racial reconciliation. What Pence says right here, that he had decades of public service that changed America forever. He will deeply be missed. That's absolutely true, whether you agree with him or not. And he absolutely had courage. He had enormous amounts of courage to do what he did and to face those odds. And when Trump says that he was a hero, he's talking about him being a civil rights hero, right? Bring that tweet up right here. And so can't we do the same? Can't we send prayers to his family, and to him on this? Or is it so extreme in our country that we can't, that someone who was a civil rights hero is completely, obliterated, and we laugh at their passing because they didn't fit the mold that we thought that they should? So, those are my 2 points. My last one is, I saw some memes going around too where someone was talking about police and, and what's going on with that debate, Blue Lives Matter and everything. And they were saying, hey, if you just follow the rule of law and what cops are telling you to do, you shouldn't have any trouble, right? And for a lot of Americans, that really is the case. And now more than ever, I would say. However, someone like John Lewis, what do you think that he sees, right, when he sees George Floyd and what happened? When he sees that meme and he remembers police refusing to enforce the law that the Supreme Court adjudicated, when he goes back to in his lifetime, when he was a young guy, he experienced the opposite. He was doing the right thing, and yet he was punished and beaten and almost killed for it, right? And so for some people, that's still very fresh in their mind. And I don't think as a conservative that means that we need to defund the police or even agree with any type of liberal agenda, but we can at least be sympathetic to that and we can at least, honor one of their great heroes in his passing and for what he did to get us to a point where it really is increasingly okay to trust the police. It is okay to, to live in a society where there's not segregation, where it's totally fine for whatever color you have to get on a bus. Now we can get to that point. Now we can have a black president, whether they're conservative or liberal, right? They could get elected. Those are good things that have happened because people like John Lewis took a stand. And I think it's totally okay to say that, even if you disagree with him in terms of his voting record or, political philosophy. So.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's just that if you come on this channel and all you're looking to do is talk against quote unquote your enemies, we can't get very far.
Right.
You're just not going to get very far. And all you're going to be doing is just vilifying the other side and promoting your own ideology of what you think is right. And so many times, Wes, like it's happened multiple times on this channel where people come in and they got their guns blazing because they're ready to shoot down everything. And all of a sudden, when you're just gentle and ready to talk and actually say, hey, defend your arguments because these are my arguments here. Like they kind of put their guns down. They're like, oh, you're wanting to talk. Okay. Well, yeah, let's have a drink. I mean, that's kind of why conservatism on tap exists. I really hope that we, right, exactly. Cheers. Let's have a drink on this. And that's why Refounding Fathers exists on this channel, is so that we can all talk together. And I think John Lewis would definitely say, hey, if you don't like the idea of abortion, go out there. Yeah. Go talk about it. Like, go develop your own protest. Like, go get into what he calls good trouble. Right? Don't riot and loot like another person's business, but get out there and like make a difference. I think the challenge is you may not agree with all of what John Lewis did, but you got to hand it to him. Like, he did all that he had done without violence.
Yeah. On
his part. And what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I would think that most people would say that they don't, want racism to continue. And if that's the case, like, what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
What part are you doing about it?
I just got a comment here, a question from Chaz, who asked, hey guys, how do you feel about Black Lives Matter? And we actually did an entire show on Black Lives Matter. And I'll give you the short story, and then maybe we can give you a link after this. We did two, that's right. And one of them was looking at, is there actual racism in the country, and what does that look like, and to what extent does it look like? And then two, Chaz, we looked at the Black Lives Matter movement, and we looked at what people say that it means, and then we looked at their website, and we got to the point where we can be sympathetic with someone who says, hey, let's be better as a country, let's work on racism to the extent that it exists. But at the same time, when there's a leftist agenda that's attached to the movement, that's where we kind of part ways. And we showed how on the Black Lives Matter movement, there are some things that seemingly aren't really related to Black lives at all. They just add that on there. And that's where we kind of parted ways. However,
Yep.
There are some good things. And it's the same thing with John Lewis, right? It's like, if you want me to talk about his voting record on abortion, then I'm going to be totally against them. I'm going to tell you exactly why it was wrong. And I could rant for hours on abortion and how evil I think it is. And if that's all that John Lewis did, we would not be having this conversation. But, what I'm going to do, and John, this goes back to your point, is I'm going to look for the good in people, and I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to look for the majority of what they stood for with their life. And if it's someone who founded Planned Parenthood and stood for that their entire life, then there's not going to be a lot that I have to say that's going to be positive. And if it's going to be someone who's not, who stood for something different, then we're going to look at that. And that's the case with John Lewis. So that's how we do it. With this channel, John, just to wrap it up, we want conservatives who are reasonable, who are willing to discuss and to debate. If you expect us to rubber stamp everything that Donald Trump says, you're not going to get that. But if he's saying things that are great, like, honoring, John Lewis, or Mike Pence doing the same thing, then absolutely high five to the president and to the vice president for doing that. We're going to get agreement on some things and not others. But the same for moderates and liberals, is we're looking for people who can engage with us and discuss and grow in this work, as opposed to just having an echo chamber. And there's going to be times where you and I disagree. There's going to be times when any of us disagree. But that's the beauty of America, is that it was founded by people who did disagree and came together to do something beautiful. And that's what we want to do here. So thanks again for your time, John. Looking forward to do our next show. As a reminder, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. So make sure you follow our pages. Get on our website at theberkingconservative.com, and you can get onto our newsletter, and you can see more great content like this, including our next show. So thanks again, John. Have a great week, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.
See you next week, man.